and honestly did more of the child rearing, at least emotionally, than my mom even did. For example,
Mm.
he would take my sister and I shopping for the new school year, and he did our hair and things of that nature.
Shout
So
out to dad.
yeah, yeah. And I mean, he also had to because my mom, she's way out of her depth. Like white lady had no idea what this.
No, but to your point though, real quick, that's not a very common experience. I think that we hear as much about is dads taking on some of those more domestic duties.
Totally. So I have always been really close to both of my parents. I grew up really attached to both of them
Mm.
and definitely experiencing a lot of love and togetherness. We did a lot together as a family, like going to church together on Sundays and then going bowling after or eating together. We would like swim in the pool together. We'd take bike rides.
Yeah.
So I had a lot of that, just classic family experiences that I'm really grateful for. I will say I had a much better relationship with my dad growing up than I did with my mom. My mom was definitely more authoritarian, and just a little bit, not the most stable person emotionally. And so, especially once I became a teenager, she and I had
Yeah.
a lot of difficulty. And then, meanwhile, during that time, my dad was really my rock. I mean, my whole life from childhood to up until becoming an adult, my dad was always my biggest fan, my
Yeah.
number one supporter, super just emotionally involved and close with both me and my sister. And honestly did more of the child rearing, at least emotionally, than my mom even did. For example,
Mm.
he would take my sister and I shopping for the new school year, and he did our hair and things of that nature.
Shout
So
out to dad.
yeah, yeah, and I mean, he also had to because my mom, she's way out of her depth. Like, white lady had no idea what to do with this.
No, but to your point though, real quick, that's not a very common experience. I think that we hear as much about is dads taking on some of those more domestic duties,
Mhm.
like still being a dad, but those are things that a lot of times I would imagine we see moms doing, and that's more widely accepted. So it's awesome to hear that your father was doing those type of things for you.
Yeah, totally. And even beyond that, he did most of the cooking in our house. He did a lot of the cleaning. I mean, like I described my mom earlier, she's a, great heart, lovely person, a little bit unstable. And so as a
Mm.
result, my dad was often just kind of the parent of the household. And but I will say my mom, she managed more. She was more of the financial manager. Like she controlled more of the finances and decided how our family money was spent and things of that nature. She did most
Yeah.
of the yard work. So it's interesting because I feel
Mm.
like I grew up watching my parents just not fit gender roles at all. They kind of just did
Yeah.
what they preferred and what they were best at. Like my dad, he's not a details guy. He's not really into numbers or things of that nature. Like didn't really care to keep up with that stuff. So I feel like I just grew up in a household where each one of them did what they wanted to do
Yeah.
and worked really well for my family. Because I personally I didn't grow up with any specific ideas about how I was supposed to act as a woman or how a man was supposed to act as a man. I just kind of watched my parents figure it out on their own terms, and it worked really well for our household.
Wow. Okay. Now I think that's very interesting to really reflect on and understand, because just thinking about what you said, that each side didn't really follow what we would consider typical roles for their particular gender, right? So you're saying mom was being more of the financial, maybe planner, advisor, guide, and usually those are things that we see men traditionally do. She's cutting grass. That's definitely traditionally a man task. Not that there's anything wrong with a woman cutting grass, but again, typical. And then again, you were talking about your dad doing you guys' hair, which I think is also very interesting. I do want to make sure we clarify here what's the background of both mom and dad, just so the audience understands what we were talking about.
Yeah, so my mom is white. Her family is French Cajun specifically. So they're white people, but they got, kind of tan skin, curly hair. Sometimes people think my mom is biracial, and she's
Mm,
enough, but yeah, French Cajun. And then my dad is black, specifically with Nigerian ancestry.
okay.
And both of my family, I mean, both of my parents and their families are from the Mississippi Gulf Coast. My
Gotcha.
family Their
Okay.
families, my families have been there for generations.
Awesome. Okay. And I just want to clarify that because I think, and I imagine we're going to get into in a little while talking a bit of it about cultural identity and what it's like when you come from backgrounds where it's a bit more mixed up. It's
Yeah.
very, very visually mixed up, and how that might play on the way that we see ourselves and how we deal with other people. But back to mom and dad. So you said you didn't really have any specific expectations because you just sort of observed, like many of us do, what our parents do. And then we start to formulate our opinion about how men and women might behave or how they interact as we get older.
Mhm.
When you talked about now, like fast forward up until your current, the present, how would you say your relationship has fared over time between you with your father and then you with your mother? Because we talked about when you were younger.
Yeah.
Do you think it changed? Do you think it evolved?
Yeah, it definitely did. As I started to grow and get older, I found myself growing closer to my mom and further apart from my dad. Especially once I moved and just kind of became an adult. I do feel like my dad had these very specific ideas about what adulthood is for a child, and kind of that he it was his responsibility to pull away a little bit and let me figure things out on my own.
Right.
So he would still be very loving and supportive in our conversations when we would talk. He would always listen to me and give me advice and just comfort me when I needed that. But
Yeah.
he very much expected me to handle and manage things on my own. And he would give me props when I did that. For example, when I graduated college, which was amazing, my family came to Philly to see me. And whenever I walked out into the field, I found my dad in the crowd of thousands of people because he was jumping up and down in the stands until I saw him. And it was just such a
Yeah.
good feeling. I can still remember it so clearly. But
Yeah.
as to say, when I graduated, he told me, congratulations, this was nothing but you and God. You did it yourself. Because as a college student, I didn't ask my parents for money. They didn't give me money. They neither one of them went to college. They didn't really have any advice for me either. Like I wouldn't call them to ask them about classes or anything of that nature.
Yeah.
And I always really appreciated my dad for giving me the credit and the props that I did, figured out on my own, and that was his expectation. That's what he expected from me. Whereas with my mom, like I said, it's gone the opposite direction where I find myself calling my mom and asking her for advice, which is not something I did ever. I didn't want to hear anything about what she had to say when I was growing up. I didn't want any kind of advice for her. I did not care what she
It's
thought.
like, no, thank you. I'm good.
Yeah, exactly. And then now as an adult, I find myself wanting her perspective often, and seeking her guidance and her wisdom on certain things. So it's been
Mm.
interesting. It's definitely my relationships with them have definitely evolved over time and like kind of in opposite directions. And I think it
Mm.
kind of makes sense when I think about the roles my parents played in my childhood, with my dad being more of the emotional, caring, nurturing one, and deciding that
Mm.
I became an adult, it's time to give me that a little bit less. And then with my mom being the one who was kind of more of the strategic head of our family, now as I'm becoming an adult myself and making my own decisions and managing things on my own, she plays a more involved role. So that's how I would describe it.
Yeah. No, that's to me that is immensely interesting. Like number one, going back to the roles, because I talk about that a lot on this platform, because a lot of us do grow up with traditional roles in terms of when I'm speaking to men, right? Most of us are expecting to be providers, to be disciplinarians, to be strategic, to provide stability across the board. Maybe not the emotional stability. That's usually what women would do or the mother would do. But the financial stability, the stability in the home, things like that. So we're already saying like not that dad didn't do that, but it just looked a little different for you in your household, right?
Yeah.
Now what's interesting though, you talked about with college. This is something I think that is in alignment with what a man would do or what a father would do. And maybe you would agree, maybe you wouldn't, but I'm going to give you my take on it. So, a difference between a mom and a dad as a child gets older, once you reach adulthood and maybe to the point where you go to college and you're going to move away. In my experience, a mom's going to have a harder time to deal with that
Mhm.
because they're usually the ones that are more emotionally attached in terms of when things go wrong, they're usually the person that you run to. Now, not that you don't go to dad, but we tend to go to dad for very specific things like I might be going to jail. I need money. Like somebody's threatening me, like that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
More threat of like personal safety.
Mhm.
Emotional stuff would usually be mom. But when you said, okay, but my dad was really emotionally tied to me, very close to me, but then he started to pull back
Mhm.
because he understood that I needed to be more independent, right? That is in alignment with what I would say most dads would do, because we understand that that's important for a young person to learn to stand up on their own,
Mhm.
right? So it's interesting that, like, so there's aspects you're saying that he would, I would say, quote unquote, be more traditional in, but then there's other aspects where it might look a little different because mom assumes some of those roles.
Yeah.
And then coming back full circle, and you're saying now I'm a bit more closer with my mom because I want to ask her things about life. I want to ask her more about her experience. I think we can never discount that, because you being a young woman, of course, to a certain degree, you're going to ask your mother because she is an adult woman.
Mhm.
She's going to have lived experiences that you have not. Not that you are the same person, obviously, but there's some commonality there that maybe you can gain wisdom from her lived experience. Do you think that's at all part of why you've reached out to her more, maybe in these later years?
Yeah, I think so, definitely. And I think I remember when she would try to give me advice, teen me or even adolescent me.
Yeah.
At that age, I was like, whatever. But now as an adult with more maturity and a little bit more wisdom, I remember certain things she told me and they've proven to be true. So
Yeah.
now she's kind of established credibility with me in terms of being someone that I can look to for guidance. And that really started, I feel like I got to that point around 22, like graduating college and going into the adult working world. I was like, oh wow, life is, you can have a lot of book smarts, but there's just so much you don't truly understand or have a grip on until you get out there and you start experiencing it yourself.